The shovel bit deep into the rocky earth as Cassius Thorne worked by moonlight, his calloused hands bleeding through torn gloves. Sweat poured down his weathered face despite the October chill that swept across the outskirts of Millbrook Township. He shouldn't be here. The elders had made their judgment, and interfering with their ancient punishment meant exile or worse. But the woman's eyes haunted him, those defiant green orbs that had stared up from the shallow grave without a trace. "Surrender. Papa, why are we digging at night?" His 7-year-old daughter Cordelia whispered from where she crouched beside him, her small hands clutching a wooden bucket of water. "Because sometimes, little dove, what's right ain't what's legal." Cassius grunted as his shovel struck something. Soft. There, Magnolia Crane's auburn hair, matted with dirt but still gleaming in the pale light. The village had buried her up to her neck 3 days ago, leaving only her head exposed to the elements as punishment for her cursed womb. Her husband Jeremiah had cast the first handful of soil, declaring her barren after 5 years of marriage. Cassius fell to his knees, frantically clearing dirt from around her face. Magnolia's eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. Her lips, cracked and bleeding, moved soundlessly. "Don't try to speak," he murmured, working faster. The earth had been packed tight around her torso, and he could see the purple marks on her neck where the cold had nearly claimed her. Cordelia, the water. As his daughter held the bucket steady, Cassius dripped precious liquid between Magnolia's parched lips. She was barely conscious, her body temperature dangerously low. 3 days buried to her neck would have killed a weaker person. But Magnolia Crane had always been steel, wrapped in silk. The sound of approaching horses froze his blood. Torchlight flickered through the bare trees, and he could hear Elder Bartholomew's voice carrying on the wind. They'd discovered his absence. "Papa?" Cordelia's voice trembled. Cassius made his choice. Abandoning the careful excavation, he began tearing at the packed earth with his bare hands, ignoring the pain as his fingernails split. Magnolia's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. This man she barely knew was risking everything to save her. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely. "Because every soul deserves mercy," he replied, finally freeing her shoulders. Her dress was torn and filthy, her body trembling violently from exposure. Without hesitation, Cassius shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her as he lifted her from the makeshift grave. The torches were closer now. Elder Bartholomew's voice boomed through the night. "Cassius Thorne, you will return the cursed woman to her rightful place." But Cassius was already running. Magnolia cradled against his chest while Cordelia raced beside them toward the woods. Behind them, the angry shouts of the village elders echoed through the darkness. Ahead lay the unknown, exile from everything they'd ever known, but perhaps for the first time in years, hope. As they disappeared into the shadowy embrace of the forest, Magnolia's hand found his shirt, clutching weakly at the fabric. She was alive, and that was enough. For now. The abandoned cabin squatted like a forgotten memory deep in whispering pines, its log walls blackened by decades of weather. Cassius kicked open the sagging door, startling a family of field mice that scurried into the shadows. Moonlight slanted through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. "It ain't much," he said softly, settling Magnolia onto the single bed that dominated the small space. "But it's shelter." Magnolia tried to sit up, her face pale as birch bark. "I can't. I won't be your burden." "Hush now." Cassius was already moving, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he arranged the moth-eaten blankets around her shaking form. "Cordelia, start gathering kindling. We need a fire." His daughter nodded solemnly and slipped outside, her small frame disappearing into the darkness with practiced ease. This wasn't their first time living rough. After his wife Beatrice died of fever 2 winters past, they'd spent months wandering before settling in Millbrook. Magnolia watched him work, her green eyes tracking his every movement as he coaxed flames to life in the stone hearth. The warm light revealed the full extent of her ordeal, dirt caked under her fingernails, rope burns around her wrists where they'd bound her before burial, and a hollow look that spoke of more than physical hunger. "Why did you do it?" she asked again, her voice stronger now that warmth was returning to her body. Cassius paused in his fire tending, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "My Beatrice. She lost 3 babies before Cordelia came. The village women whispered the same things about her. Called her cursed." His jaw tightened. "I know what it's like to watch someone you love blamed for God's mysteries." "But you don't love me," Magnolia said quietly. "You barely know me." "No," he agreed, settling into the rickety chair beside her bed. "But I know what you are. And what's that? Stronger than any of them gave you credit for." His calloused hand briefly touched hers before pulling away. 3 days in that ground would have killed most folks. You held on." Cordelia returned with an armload of dry branches, her cheeks pink from the cold. As Cassius built up the fire, the child approached Magnolia with the shy curiosity of youth. "Are you really cursed?" she asked in that direct way only children managed. "Cordelia," Cassius began, but Magnolia held up a weak hand. "It's all right." She studied the little girl's earnest face. "Some folks believe I am. What do you think?" Cordelia tilted her head, considering. "Mama always said curses are just stories people tell when they're scared." "You don't look scary. You look sad." The simple observation hit Magnolia like a physical blow. Tears gathered in her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since the village's judgment 3 days ago. "Your mama sounds like she was wise," Magnolia whispered. "She was," Cordelia agreed matter-of-factly. "Papa says she's watching over us from heaven. Maybe she sent him to help you." Cassius cleared his throat roughly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We should rest. Dawn ain't far off and we need to figure out our next move." But as he banked the fire and settled onto the floor with his coat as a pillow, Magnolia found herself watching him in the dying light. This stranger who'd risked everything, his safety, his daughter's future, for a woman his community had condemned. There was something in his quiet strength that called to parts of herself she'd thought buried along with her hopes. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and somewhere, in the distance, the faint sound of search parties echoed through the trees. Their sanctuary was temporary at best, but for the first time in years, Magnolia felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, but hope nonetheless. 3 weeks in the cabin had transformed their strange, little family into something resembling normalcy. Cassius hunted and trapped, while Magnolia, her strength slowly returning, mended their clothes and taught Cordelia letters by firelight. But the first blizzard of winter struck with vicious intensity, trapping them inside for days. "The roof won't hold much more," Cassius muttered, watching ice form along the beam where snow had found its way through the rotting shingles. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and sending icy drafts through every crack. Magnolia looked up from where she sat braiding Cordelia's hair. "There's an old root cellar behind the cabin. My grandmother used to tell stories about this place. It belonged to a trapper named Silas Crow. He dug deep to store his furs." "How do you know about this cabin?" Cassius asked, pausing in his efforts. "To reinforce the door with fallen timber. My family's been in these parts for 4 generations. Grandmother Opal knew every story, every hidden place." Magnolia's fingers stilled in Cordelia's hair. She used to say this land remembers everything, every joy, every sorrow. A section of roof sagged ominously, dumping snow onto their meager supplies. Cassius made the decision quickly. "We moved to the cellar, now." The underground space was cramped but solid, carved into the hillside with stone walls that had withstood decades. As they huddled around a small fire built in an iron brazier, Cordelia asked the question that had been haunting them all. "Are we going to live like this? Forever, Papa?" Cassius exchanged a glance with Magnolia over his daughter's head. They'd avoided speaking of the future, living day to day in their fragile peace. But children deserved honesty. "I don't know, little dove," he admitted. "We can't go back to Millbrook, and winter's just starting." There are other places, Magnolia said softly. Towns where nobody knows our faces or our stories. Places where a man and his daughter and… She paused, uncertainty flickering across her features. And a woman they rescued from a grave, Cassius finished quietly. The storm raged above them for 3 more days. In that small space with nowhere to hide and nothing to do but exist together, walls came down. Magnolia spoke of her marriage to Jeremiah, how love had curdled into resentment with each failed pregnancy, how she'd begun to believe she truly was cursed. Cassius told her about Beatrice's final days, how she'd made him promise to find happiness again. She was delirious near the end, he said, his voice rough with old grief. But she kept saying there was someone coming. Someone who needed us as much as we'd need her. You think she meant me? Magnolia asked. I think my Beatrice always saw things the rest of us missed. On the 4th night, as the wind finally began to quiet, Cordelia fell asleep between them on the makeshift bed they'd fashioned from old furs. In the dim light of dying embers, Magnolia found herself studying Cassius's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the premature silver threading through his dark hair, the gentleness in his work-worn hands as he adjusted the blanket around his daughter. What are we to each other? She whispered. He turned to meet her gaze, and in his dark eyes she saw the same question that kept her awake at night. They were bound together by circumstances, thrown into an intimacy that neither had chosen, but both were beginning to treasure. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I can't imagine letting you go. His hand found hers in the darkness, rough fingers intertwining with smooth ones. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something deeper than either had dared hope for. Outside, the storm finally spent itself against the mountains, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and silence. When they emerged the next morning, they would have decisions to make about their future. But for now, in the warm safety of their underground refuge, they were simply 3 souls who had found each other in the wilderness. And that was enough. Spring arrived early in the whispering pines, bringing with it the sound of running water and the distant voices of search parties. Cassius stood at the cabin's single window, watching men on horseback move through the trees below. Elder Bartholomew's distinctive white beard was visible even from this distance. They're not giving up, Magnolia said quietly, joining him at the window. 6 months had transformed her from the broken woman he'd pulled from the earth. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight, and there was color in her cheeks again. Strength had returned to her voice, purpose to her movements. No, Cassius agreed. They won't. Not while Bartholomew leads them. Cordelia looked up from where she was teaching herself to weave baskets from pine needles, a skill Magnolia had shown her. Why can't they just leave us alone? Because people fear what they don't understand, Magnolia said, settling beside the child. And they don't understand how someone could survive what I did and still be walking around. The truth was more complicated than that, and they all knew it. Magnolia hadn't just survived, she'd thrived. The haunted, hollow-eyed woman of winter was gone, replaced by someone vibrant and alive. The village had expected her to die. Had counted on it. Her continued existence was a reproach to their judgment. There's a wagon train forming in Copper Falls, Cassius said suddenly. Families heading west, looking for new lives. I heard talk of it at the trading post. Magnolia's hand stilled on the basket she was helping Cordelia weave. You want to run. I want us to live, he corrected. All of us, together. The word us hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Over the long winter months, they'd become a family in all but name. Cassius and Magnolia had grown closer, their conversations lasting long into the night after Cordelia fell asleep. There had been moments, hands brushing as they worked, glances that lingered too long. But neither had pushed beyond the boundaries of propriety. And if I can't give you children? Magnolia asked, the old pain creeping back into her voice. If the village was right about my curse? Cassius turned from the window, his dark eyes intense. Then we'll love the one we have. Cordelia needs a mother, and you… He paused, choosing his words carefully. You need to be someone's everything, Again, not their burden or their disappointment, but their blessing. Tears gathered in Magnolia's eyes. I'm damaged goods, Cassius, used up, cast off. Why would you want? Because you're not damaged, he interrupted, crossing to kneel beside her chair. You're refined, tested, proven stronger than anyone imagined. His calloused hand cupped her cheek. And because somewhere between digging you out of that ground and watching you teach my daughter to read, I fell in love with you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had dared cross before. Cordelia looked up from her weaving, her young face serious. Does this mean Magnolia would be my new mama? If she'll have us, Cassius said softly, his eyes never leaving Magnolia's face. Through the window they could hear the search party moving closer. Voices calling, horses snorting, the sound of men who wouldn't be deterred. Time was running out for their peaceful isolation. Magnolia reached up to cover Cassius's hand with her own. I've been afraid for so long, she whispered. Afraid I was broken. Afraid I was cursed. Afraid I'd never be worthy of love again. And now, she looked at Cordelia, who was watching with the patient expectancy of youth, then back at Cassius. Now I think maybe the village was wrong about what my story was supposed to be. What do you mean? They saw my inability to bear children as an ending, a failure. Her voice grew stronger. But maybe it was just the beginning. Maybe I was meant to be a mother a different way. Cassius leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. Is that a yes? That's a yes to everything, she whispered. To running, to starting over, to being a family, to love. When he kissed her, it tasted like spring water and new beginnings. Outside, the search party called to each other as they moved through the forest. But inside the cabin, 3 hearts beat as one, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The Copper Falls wagon master squinted at the papers Cassius had forged during their desperate journey down the mountain. Says here you're married. Cassius and Magnolia Thorne, daughter Cordelia. That's right, Magnolia said smoothly, her hand finding Cassius's. They'd practiced this story during the long nights on the trail, memorizing every detail until it felt like truth. Wedding rings awful new for a woman with a 7-year-old, the wagon master observed. Cassius's jaw tightened, but Magnolia smiled with a serenity that came from months of finding her strength. My first husband died in a mining accident last winter. Cassius and I married quickly, for Cordelia's sake and for warmth during the cold months. Sometimes survival comes before convention. The wagon master grunted approval. Practical woman. We need more of those on the trail. He stamped their papers. You'll be in wagon position 12. We leave at dawn. As they walked away from the registration table, Cordelia tugging between them, Magnolia felt the weight of their deception. It doesn't sit right lying about being married. Then maybe we shouldn't be lying, Cassius said quietly. She stopped walking, causing other families to stream around them in the busy encampment. What do you mean? There's a preacher here. Reverend Morrison. He's traveling with the Kellerman family. We could... He cleared his throat, suddenly uncertain. If you wanted to, we could make it true. Magnolia stared at him, her heart hammering. You want to marry me? Truly marry me? I've wanted to marry you since that first morning in the cabin when I woke up and saw you braiding Cordelia's hair by firelight. His dark eyes were serious, intent. But I didn't want you to feel pressured. You've been through so much. Yes, she interrupted. Yes, I'll marry you. Tonight, if possible. Cordelia bounced excitedly between them. Really? We're going. To be a real family? We've been a real family for months, little dove, Cassius said, lifting his daughter into his arms. Now we're just going to make it official. Reverend Morrison was a weathered man with kind eyes, who asked no questions about their haste. As the sun set over the wagon camp, casting golden light across the assembled families, he married them, beside their covered wagon with simple words that carried the weight of mountains. Do you, Cassius Thorne, take Magnolia to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live." "I do," Cassius said, his voice carrying across the circle of witnesses. His eyes never left Magnolia's face. "And do you, Magnolia Crane?" "Thorn," she corrected softly. "Magnolia Thorn." The Reverend smiled. "Do you, Magnolia Thorn, take Cassius to be your husband, to love and cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of joy so pure it threatened to overwhelm her. They had no rings to exchange. The simple band she wore had been fashioned by Cassius from a piece of silver he'd traded for at the last settlement. But when he slipped it onto her finger, it felt more precious than any treasure. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Morrison announced. When Cassius's lips met hers, the wagon camp erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started playing a fiddle, and couples began dancing around the central fire. But Magnolia only had eyes for her new husband and the daughter who was now officially hers. Later, as the camp settled into sleep around them, they lay together in their wagon bed, truly together for the first time. The canvas walls couldn't contain the enormity of what they'd found in each other. "I love you," Cassius whispered against her hair. "I love you too," she replied, her hand finding his over her heart. "Both of you." Outside, coyotes sang to the stars, and the wind carried the scent of sage and new possibilities. They were no longer refugees running from a past that had tried to bury them. They were a family, bound by choice and love and the promise of whatever lay ahead on the trail west. The woman who had once been condemned as cursed and barren now fell asleep in her husband's arms, dreaming not of the children she couldn't bear, but of the daughter she'd been given, and the man who'd seen her worth when no one else could. It was enough. It was everything. 2 months into the westward journey, the wagon train faced its greatest test. Not from the elements, but from the past, that refused to stay buried. Riders coming hard from the east called Samuel McKinnon from his position as scout. The wagon master raised his spyglass, squinting at the dust cloud approaching across the plains. Magnolia felt ice form in her stomach as she recognized the lead rider's distinctive white beard. "Elder Bartholomew," she whispered to Cassius, who was walking beside their oxen. "How many?" he asked grimly. 6, maybe 7. Magnolia's hand instinctively went to Cordelia, who was napping in the wagon bed. "They've followed us this far. They won't stop now." The wagon master called for a halt as the riders approached, their horses lathered with sweat from hard travel. Elder Bartholomew's cold blue eyes swept the circle of wagons until they found what they sought. "There," he pointed directly at Magnolia. "The woman there. She's a criminal, fled from justice. We've come to bring her back." Murmurs ran through the assembled families. These were people who'd grown to know and trust the Thorns over 2 months of shared hardship. Magnolia had delivered the Walsh baby during a difficult birth, had nursed fever through the crossing at Devil's Creek, had become beloved by every child in the train for her storytelling around the evening fires. "What's the crime?" asked Reverend Morrison, stepping forward. "Adultery, witchcraft, corrupting the natural order." Bartholomew's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. "She was properly judged and sentenced by our community. This man," he pointed at Cassius, "interfered with lawful justice." "I see a woman who's been nothing but helpful to this company," said Wagon Master Jenkins. "And I see a man protecting his family." "His family?" Bartholomew laughed harshly. "That barren witch isn't capable of being any man's true wife. She's cursed, I tell you. Wherever she goes, misfortune follows." The words hit Magnolia like physical blows, bringing back all the old shame and self-doubt. She took a step backward, then another, her confidence crumbling under the weight of familiar condemnation. But Cassius moved to stand in front of her, his body a shield against Bartholomew's venom. "My wife is under my protection, and she's done nothing wrong." "Wife?" one of Bartholomew's men spat. "No true marriage can exist with such a creature." "Then you're calling Reverend Morrison a liar," said Mrs. Kellerman sharply. the preacher's wife stepping forward with flashing eyes. Because he performed the ceremony himself. And calling us all fools, added Samuel McKinnon, because we've seen nothing but good from this family. A line was being drawn in the dust between the two groups, and Magnolia realized with growing amazement that the wagon train was choosing sides. Her side. You don't understand, Bartholomew tried again. This woman is poison. She brings death. Do infants, failure to crop, sickness to livestock? Funny, interrupted young Tom Walsh, holding his healthy baby son. Because she's the one who saved my boy's life when he came out blue. Used her hands and her breath to get him breathing again. And she sat up 3 nights straight, nursing my Martha through the fever, added another voice. Taught my daughter to read, called out someone else. One by one, the families spoke up, sharing stories of Magnolia's kindness and skill. With each testimony, her spine straightened a little more, her chin lifted a little higher. These people saw her not as cursed or barren, but as valuable, worthy, needed. Elder Bartholomew's face grew purple with rage. You're all deceived by her witchcraft. I have the authority. You have authority in your village, Wagon Master Jenkins cut him off. Out here, you're just another traveler, and you're not welcome in my train. This isn't finished, Bartholomew snarled, but he was already backing down, recognizing the united front against him. As the elders rode away, defeated for now but not permanently discouraged, Cassius turned to Magnolia. She was crying, not from shame this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. Did you hear them? She whispered. All those people standing up for me. They see what I see, he replied, pulling her into his arms. A woman of worth, a woman of strength. My woman. That night, as the wagon train resumed its westward journey, Magnolia sat around the communal fire listening to the easy chatter of people who'd accepted her completely. Cordelia leaned against her side, pointing out constellations, while Cassius's arm encircled them both. For the first time in her adult life, Magnolia felt truly free, not just from physical bondage, but from the prison of other people's judgments. She was exactly where she belonged, with people who saw her true value. The past might follow them, but it could never again define them. California's Sacramento Valley stretched before them like a green promise, the Sierra Nevada mountains rising majestically in the distance. The wagon train had reached journey's end, and families were scattering to claim their new lives in the Golden State. Cassius stood on a small rise, surveying the fertile bottomland that would become their homestead. Rich soil, good water, timber, for building, everything needed for a fresh start. Beside him, Magnolia held Cordelia's hand, both of them squinting against the bright western sun. It's beautiful, Magnolia breathed, like the Garden of Eden. Better, Cordelia announced with 8-year-old certainty, because we're all here together. As if summoned by the child's words, a group of their wagon train companions approached across the meadow. The Walsh family, the McKinnons, Reverend Morrison and his wife, and a dozen others who'd become more than traveling companions. They'd become chosen family. We've been talking, said Samuel McKinnon, his weathered face serious. About settling, close together, making a proper community. Safety in numbers, added Tom Walsh, shifting his baby son to his other arm. And we've gotten used to having good neighbors. Mrs. Morrison stepped forward, her eyes kind but determined. We've also been talking about names for our settlement. Seems fitting to call it Haven, considering how many of us have found refuge in this company. Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes. After a lifetime of being cast out, to be invited in, truly, it was overwhelming. There's something else, said Mrs. Kellerman, producing a bundle wrapped in her best quilt. We took up a collection during the journey. Every family contributed something. Inside the quilt were gifts that spoke of love and acceptance. A hand-carved cradle from the McKinnons, embroidered linens from the Walsh women, silver spoons from the preacher's family, and seeds from everyone, beans and corn, flowers and herbs, all the makings of a garden that would feed both body and soul. But we don't have children to put in a cradle, Magnolia protested weakly. Yet, said Mrs. Morrison with a meaningful smile. Give California time to work its magic. That evening, as they made camp for the last time as a wagon train, Cassius and Magnolia walked to the creek that ran through their chosen land. The water sang over smooth stones, and fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. Do you think she's right? Magnolia asked softly. About California magic? Cassius was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow toward the distant sea. I think magic is what we make of it, and we've already made miracles. He turned to face her, his weathered hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. You were buried like a seed, Magnolia. They meant it as death, but seeds buried in dark places grow into something beautiful. As if to prove his point, she'd noticed changes in herself over the past weeks. A fullness where once there'd been emptiness, a glow that had nothing to do with the California sun. Changes she was afraid to name, afraid to hope for. Cassius, she whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. I think I might be. His eyes went wide, then filled with wonder. Are you sure? No, she admitted. But my body feels different, hopeful, like it's finally ready to trust in tomorrow. When he kissed her, it tasted like promise and possibility. Around them, the California evening painted the world in shades of gold, and somewhere in the distance they could hear Cordelia laughing with the other children as they chased fireflies through the tall grass. 6 months later, Magnolia Thorne delivered a healthy son in the cabin Cassius had built with help from their neighbors. As she held the squalling infant against her breast, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a grave in Millbrook to this moment of perfect joy. What will we call him? Cassius asked, his voice rough with emotion. Magnolia looked out the window at the thriving settlement of Haven, where children played in gardens that bloomed with impossible abundance, where neighbors shared both sorrows and celebrations, where love had planted itself and grown beyond all expectation. Hope, she said simply. His name is Hope. And in the golden light of their California morning, with her husband's arms around her and their children's laughter filling the air, Magnolia finally understood that sometimes the most fertile ground is found not in the earth but in the human heart, and that love, like life itself, always finds a way to bloom. The woman who'd once been condemned as barren had become the mother of a community, the keeper of its stories, the proof that no judgment is final when hearts are brave enough to choose a different ending.